Okay, guys, we're going to still talk about graphing quadratics using those steps 1 through 5, but we're going to kind of do part 2 of this. So again, I'm going to use this graphing paper I've been doing, and I'm going to do 2 different examples on here. So you can start to see some different ideas of what it looks like and get used to the 5 steps. In the center of this, I'm going to do like I did before, and I'm going to say graphing quadratics. Using steps 1 through 5, and this is going to be part 2. So part 1 was the part we did yesterday, and this should be similar in idea, but we're just going to keep practicing so you kind of get the hang of this. So I'm going to try to do what I did the last time and kind of turn this so I can write as we go. So here's our first one. We're going to start with, I'm going to call them A so we can number our steps and not get confused. We have the equation y equals x squared plus 4x minus 2. So for step 1, we have to identify A, B, and C. Now, I do notice there's no number out there in front of the x squared, so I assume that it's 1. So that is my A value. B is positive 4, and C is negative 2. Be careful that if it's minus 2 that you actually get negative 2 there. That's going to be important. Okay, for step 2, we have to determine how it opens, and that's based on A. So if A is 1, that's a positive number. So that means it opens up, and it has a minimum. Now for step 3, we're going to do our axis of symmetry. So I have x equals negative b over 2a. Every time we've done this, I've rewritten that because I want to make sure I'm getting a good understanding of how to do it. So my b value is positive 4, so the opposite of positive 4 would be negative 4. My a value is 1, so I'm going to put a 1 there. Now, if I were to take this whole part and put it into Desmos, I would end up with negative 2. So x equals negative 2 is my axis of symmetry. Okay, so for step 4, we've got to find our vertex. And this number is my x value, so I just need to find the y. So to find that, I have to take the equation they gave me and wherever there's an x, I'm going to put negative 2 in for it. So this is going to go away. It's going to be negative 2. This x is going to go away. And it's negative 2. Just going to make that subtraction so you can see it. And then I need to take this and put it into Desmos. So if I put it in there to calculate it, don't forget that you need to have your parentheses around it so you don't kind of screw anything up there. Okay? So I end up with this one with y being negative 6. So that goes right here. Okay, so step 5, I'm going to make my table. So I start with x. Y equals x squared plus 4x minus 2. And I want to have 5 spots in the table. And I know that the vertex point that I came up with right here is going to go right in the middle of my table. So I know -2, -6 is going to go here. Okay, now I need to figure out what comes before this and what comes after. So if this is -2, it's going to be -3 and -4. And the other side is going to be -1 and 0. So now I need to take these 4 values that haven't been plugged in yet and put them in the equation. So -4 squared plus 4 times -4 minus 2. -3 squared plus 4 times -3 minus 2. -1 squared plus 4 times -1 plus 2. 0 squared plus 4 times 0 plus 2. Now the big thing for us is I need to take each of these pieces and plug them in to Desmos to get my answer. So if I plug in the first one, I end up with -2, -5. This one's already done, so I'm going to go to this one. That's going to be -5, and that's going to be -2. So realize now we've got that kind of pattern around the vertex that we want. So let me see if I can turn this. Just going to try to make it as big as I can here to write on. Okay, now I'm going to take these pieces back here and make my point. So -4, -2, -3, -5, -2, -6, -1, -5, and 0, -2. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a list of those points in the top of my graph, just so I know what I'm graphing. So -4, -2, -3, -5, -2, -6, -1, -5, and 0, -2. So I've got those 5 points. I am going to go through, here's my X and Y, just so I know what side's up. And I'm going to graph these 5 points that I have here. 2, 3. So -4, -2, -3, -5, -2, -6, -1, -5, and 0, -2. Now, the good news about those the 5 steps is you get these mirror images that make it really easy to be able to go through and make your line. Now remember, again, it should look like a U and not a V. So do your best there to make sure this is kind of look rounded at the bottom. Okay, let's try one more example. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to flip my paper over. What do you know? It actually worked. Turn it like this so I can write. Sorry, you have to be happy with the little victories here. Okay, so this is going to be B, and my equation is y equals -3x plus 6x plus 1. So my first piece for step 1 is to identify A, B, and C. So there's my A, there's my B, and there's my C. So -3, +6, and +1. Okay, for step 2, I have to determine if it opens up or down. So I have A equals -3. So if it's a negative number, that means that it opens down and has a maximum. Now remember, the whole reason that's even important is that if I go to graph here and my graph doesn't open down, it doesn't have a maximum, then I better back the bus up and figure out what I did wrong, because that means I made some kind of an error somewhere. Okay, for step 3, we're going to find our axis of symmetry. So I have x equals -b over 2a. So if b is 6, then negative b, or the opposite of b, would be negative 6. A is negative 3. Now, if I take that whole thing and put it into Desmos, I'm going to end up with 1. So x equals 1 is my axis of symmetry. Okay, so for step 4, we need to find our vertex. We know this number is our x value. So now, to be able to find my y, I have to take the equation they gave me, and I'm going to take this and put it in these spots. So I'm going to put in my 1 there. I'm going to put in my 1 there. Now, if I take this part right here and I plug it into Desmos, I'm going to end up with 4. So that gives you your other part for your vertex. Okay, now I'm going to go off to this other side over here, and I'm going to start to make my table. Now, I'm just going to get my outline done, and then I'm going to move in a little bit so you can see this. So I have y equals 3x squared plus 6x plus 1. I'm going to make my 5 steps. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you have to go a little bit past that, you can. But realize that we're going to take this vertex point and it's going to go right in the middle. So that means it's going to be 1 and 4. So if I want to think about the numbers that come before, if this is 1, this will be 0 and negative 1. And if this is 1 after, it would be 2 and then 3. Okay, now I'm going to start to plug in my values. So negative 3, negative 1 squared, plus 6 times negative 1 squared plus 1. And I'm going to keep going right down my list and keep plugging them in. Then I'm going to plug in 2. Then I'm going to plug in 3. Now, I do need to take each one of these and plug them in to Desmos. So if I plug the first one in, I end up with negative 8, 1, middle one's already done. This is going to be 1, and this is going to be negative 8. So again, remember, we're putting these together to be able to get our points to graph down here. Okay, so I'm going to turn this a little bit just so I can graph. Let's see how big I can make it. Okay, those points I just pointed out, I'm going to put right above this graph here so I can see them. So I have, oops, might help if I had a pen. Negative 1, negative 8, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, 1, and 3, negative 8. And I'm going to go ahead and label X and Y so that I can start to graph. So negative 1, negative 8, 0, 1, oops, try it up here, 1, 4, 2, 1, and then 3, negative 8. So you can see the mirror image points and the vertex. You can tell, remember we said earlier, it's got to open down. You can tell this one's going to open down and it has a maximum at that vertex point. So let's see, so there and there. Okay, we'll keep working on this together in class.